Coming up in this week's Torah Pearls.
The first successful telegraph was sent on 24 May 1844. It consisted of words of Balaam. What were those words?
What's with the red ink in the text of the Dead Sea Scroll 4Q27 numbers and the Deir Alla inscription?
Is the angel of the Lord really called Satan?
Is Baal Peor a place or a god?
All right, Jono, let's jump in.
We better start. G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company here once again on Truth to You. That's truth number 2, letter U.org. Of course, I am Jono Vandor, and joining me from the HOREB Institute is Ross Nichols, author of the Moses Scroll. G'day, mate.
Hello, Jono. How are you, my friend?
Well, we find ourselves, Ross, in an interesting Torah portion. Of course, we are in season 3 of Torah Pearls, and we're now in Balak. Yep. And I'm going to say, a love-hate relationship with this Torah portion.
Okay.
I love it because I just think it's one of the cool. I love it as a story. I think it is
a good story.
It's just a fascinating story. It draws you in immediately, and it really holds your interest. I think it's well written. It's fascinating, but from a theological perspective and a philosophical perspective, it has some inconsistencies, Ross. It has a lot of inconsistencies, and even more so when you approach it from the lens through which we are approaching Torah Pearls this season round. Third season, of course, through the lens of the Moses Scroll and the documentary hypothesis, it presents even more questions. So perhaps I'm going to have more questions than I've ever had before in this Torah portion. Perhaps you can answer some of those for me. But this is where I am. So I'm keen to get into it. Again, as I've mentioned before, this is one of my favorite stories in the Pentateuch, if I can say that.
Yeah.
But I have some very differing views about it now. How do you feel about this one?
Well, I'm in total agreement with you. And one of the things that I thought about as I was preparing for this class is I remember there is a section in the Talmud called Baba Batra.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Baba Batra 14:15. This is where there is discussion about who wrote what book or who wrote what sections of the Hebrew Bible. And one of the things that it says there that I thought was very interesting years ago when I first came across it is that Moses wrote, among other things, it says his book, Moses wrote his book, which I would assume, and I put in my notes, the Scroll of Moses, but it says he also wrote the book of Balaam. So interestingly enough, now you would think that, most of the Talmud's view would be, well, Moses wrote Genesis 1:1 through 34:12 of Deuteronomy, but it singles this out as the story of Balaam as a separate book. So we're going to be dealing with this. I love the story too. It's got some really interesting things, and then we have a different view of this than we might have had a few years ago.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, quite right.
Yeah.
All right, well, so maybe we should kick off, of course, with our AI critical scholar, Ezra. Ezra, if you could give us an academic overview of this portion, that would be a great way to start.
Now, here's a narrative that reads like political satire wrapped in divine comedy. It's named after the Moabite king who, understandably, panics when Israel camps near his borders. So what does Balak do? He hires a prophet for profit, Balaam, to curse Israel. That sets the stage for one of the most enigmatic figures in the Torah, a non-Israelite prophet who speaks with Yahweh yet seems incapable of resisting personal gain. From a documentary perspective, the Balaam cycle reflects layers. J and E sources appear to interweave here, with Elohistic elements like divine dreams and angels, and Yahwistic tones surfacing in the talking donkey episode. That donkey, by the way, may well be a literary device, used to expose Balaam's spiritual blindness. Yes, the seer can't see what his beast can. That irony is thick. Text critically, the structure of the 3 oracles, plus the 4th bonus one, follows a rising crescendo, where Balaam ends up blessing Israel instead of cursing it. These poetic oracles are some of the oldest Hebrew in the Torah, likely pre-monarchic. And intriguingly, Balaam's name shows up outside the Bible, in an 8th century BCE Aramaic inscription from Deir Alla, portraying him as a powerful visionary. That extra-biblical witness adds real academic weight to his inclusion. Then, just as the prophetic fireworks settle, the the narrative turns sharply. Israel's men are seduced into Baal worship through Moabite and Midianite women, a theological crisis that leads to a violent purge. So, the parasha ends not with divine blessing, but human failure. It's a portion of contradictions, blessing amidst hostility, prophecy from a foreigner, and Israel's stumble right after divine endorsement. Perfect material for debate.
A prophet for profit, man. I kind of like that. I don't think I've ever come up with that designation. I think that's pretty good.
Listen, Ezra just mentioned the 8th century BCE Aramaic inscription from Deir Alla. Now, we did see that in 2022.
Yeah.
We were there at the museum in Amman, Jordan. Well, great museum. There's some really cool stuff in there.
Yeah.
And this was one of them. And would it be a good way to start before we actually get into the Torah portion, just to comment on that, or can we ask Ezra for a little bit more information? What would you like to do?
Let's do both, Jono, because you and I have a perspective that Ezra doesn't have, because Ezra wasn't there with us. But I'm sure Ezra can give sort of a kind of a summary of the prophecies of this Balaam and this inscription. That
let's ask him that, and let's also ask Ezra about the red text that appears in that inscription.
Now we're digging into the good stuff, the Deir Alla inscription. If you've never heard of it, buckle up, because this artifact has shaken up the conversation about the historicity of biblical characters in a big way. Discovered in 1967 at a site in modern-day Jordan, the Deir Alla inscription dates to around the 8th century BCE. It's written in an early West Semitic dialect, likely a mix of Aramaic and local Canaanite elements, and it's painted in red and black ink on plaster walls, almost like an ancient prophetic billboard. What's wild is that it refers repeatedly to a seer named Balaam, son of Peor, which is the exact same name and patronymic found in the Book of Numbers. That's not a casual overlap. Scholars have long taken this as a signal that the biblical Balaam wasn't just a literary creation. He may have been a known prophetic figure in the broader Northwest Semitic world. The inscription presents Balaam not as an Israelite prophet, but as a visionary who receives revelations from the divine realm, specifically from a council of gods. That's plural. The text opens dramatically. The gods came to him at night, and Balaam wakes up weeping because the divine message he received foretells destruction and chaos. He's then portrayed as a kind of spiritual intermediary who seeks to avert disaster, though it's not entirely clear how successful he is. Now, as for the red and black ink, that's where it gets interesting. The text is structured visually with key divine speech or significant prophetic phrases in red ink, the rest in black. It's essentially a color-coded theological system. Scholars sometimes draw comparisons here with how the red letter editions of the New Testament mark Jesus' words in red. But let's be clear, that's a modern printing choice. The Deir Alla use of red ink is ancient and may have been intended to highlight the direct words or presence of the gods, almost a proto-liturgical technique. What this inscription reveals is that Balaam was revered outside Israelite tradition and possibly had a reputation as a feared and effective prophet among Transjordanian peoples. That bolsters the idea that the biblical authors incorporated a well-known Near Eastern seer into the Israelite narrative, possibly to subvert or co-opt his image. In Numbers, Balaam's mouth is ultimately hijacked by Yahweh to bless Israel, which might be a theological power play against this widely known pagan prophet. As for where this is housed today, the fragments of the inscription are kept in the Jordan Archaeological Museum in Amman. It's not the Louvre, but it's a pilgrimage spot for anyone who's serious about the intersection of biblical texts and material culture. So when we read about Balaam in the Torah, we're not just reading a parable, we're tapping into a much older and wider cultural memory, one that Israel reinterpreted to tell its own story.
Interesting. This is, Jono, I know that we saw this together. This is one of my favorite archaeological discoveries. When we saw this, I mean, I was really moved by this because, like you, I have always enjoyed the story of Balaam, and to find archaeologically that this could be a real person behind this. I mean, it was real powerful. I think it sort of knocked me for a loop to actually stand there and see it right in front of me.
Yeah, and so he seems to be an individual, maybe not notorious, but someone of note, like someone of name, of renown, as it says in the biblical text. And so questions come up like, has the biblical text appropriated this individual into its own narrative, which may well be the case, because what we see here is we're supposed to understand in the Pentateuch that this is Moses writing this, that this is happening in Moses' time. But of course, centuries are between Moses and this particular inscription. So when did he exist, and how did these things unfold? And as Ezra's already said, this is a bringing together of various sources, J and E mostly. And I think this is mostly J. Have I got that right? At least according to Richard Elliott Freeman.
I'm looking at it, and it looks, at least in the initial part, to be fairly evenly split. But I guess
right?
As you get further in, it could very well be more of one than the other. Yeah, I didn't see that. So if you saw it, I'm going to just look at it as we go.
But yeah. Let us know as we go. And so we have this text in Aman. We have this text in the Moses scroll as well. There's a little bit of overlap there. There's a little pericope just in there as well. We're going to address that. And then the question becomes, okay, so how did this story evolve as we have it in Numbers? Do we have three sources that have sort of solidly come together over the centuries? Seems like that's probably the case. And as we're going to see, Ross, there's a number of fairly obvious anachronisms that call into question this whole narrative.
By the way, it looks like it looks like it's mostly E. The majority of the story is mostly E, yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
Okay.
I think I was looking at Baden, and I think Baden says it's mostly J, and they seem to disagree, these two gentlemen, on who it might be. What everyone agrees on is the priestly source, but when it comes to J and E, there's a little bit of, anyway. So
a little back and forth.
And, but on the red letters, I was surprised to learn that that's not Jesus speaking there, Ross, interestingly.
That's right. That's right, or at least not according to the text. It is, though. It is striking that it is Balaam, son of Peor. And so anyway,
is that the
really
part that is in red? Is it his name?
I don't remember which part, but I tell you, as I recall, the wiki is really good and even gives quite a few examples of the text. And there are things that correspond with what we know from the biblical text. For instance, in this inscription, as I recall, it refers to God in a form of what we would say Shaddai in the Hebrew. So you see correlation between see correlation between the biblical story and what we see here. So, but one wonders, we were talking about this off air, how much of this story, because here we have now arrived at the borders of Moab. How much of this story fits into the contemporary time of Moses, and is any of it brought in later? And let me just say one thing about, the text introduces where we're at, the way that it describes that, they're right there across from Jericho and so forth in what is called the plains, at least according to the ASV, the plains of Moab. And in Hebrew, this is the Aravot. So it's part of the Arava, which is another word that means the lowland and so forth in that region. So we're in the plains of Moab. This is where we are, and this is where it gets really interesting. The question is, what was the early strata of this story? Go ahead.
That was one of the first questions I was going to ask you, because as we understand it, the boundaries of Moab during the time of Moses extended to the Wadi Arnon, or what is the Wadi Mujib, heading up to the east, where the Moses scroll was uncovered, and beyond that was there's Ammon to the east, and the Amorite. There was some Amorite territory that was gained by the Israelites there, which eventually becomes Reuben, right? But what seems to be presented here, Ross, correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems to represent a latter boundary, an extension of Moab as it came to be over centuries later. Is that fair?
Oh, interesting. No, I don't. I haven't really looked at that. That is interesting, though. So, in other words, you're suggesting that the geography, as it's presented here, would really match a later time period.
It seems to be the case.
Then what? Okay, it could be.
That's how I understand it, and maybe our viewers can comment on that if they have some insight into that. But to my mind, that seems to be the way that it appears. Now, just going back to the red ink just for a second, I'm going to be quoting a little bit, just some differences that we find, again, as I did last week, in 4Q27 numbers, a Dead Sea Scroll. Interestingly, Ross, this is one of the very few Dead Sea Scrolls, and I haven't done a lot of research into this, but my understanding is that this is one of the few Dead Sea Scrolls that contains some red ink. And I think maybe 11 times either a word or a phrase is curiously written in red. I don't really know why that is. It may also be for emphasis or to draw attention. It also seems to be kind of random, so I'm not really sure. But about 11 times, I think.
In what now? What was the Dead Sea Scroll?
4Q27 numbers.
And is it dealing with the story of Balaam there?
It does, and we're going to touch on that. But I don't believe that there is any overlap in as far as the use of red ink is concerned.
Yeah, but still, I mean, if it has to do, I mean, it really is interesting. I'd never heard that.
It is. Yeah, it's one of the very few that contains red ink. And there's like 5, I think, Dead Sea Scrolls that has some curious variation like that. But in this one, to my eyes, it seems kind of random. But surely it's not. It must mean something. I've read that some suggest that it might be used for a heading or for first lines or verses. That might be the case. It might be first line, but it seems to sort of interrupt itself into the text. I'm really not the expert when it comes to this, and I didn't have enough time to investigate it. All I know is that there might be around 7.
You just gave everybody, including me, something cool to look up. But
so
we've got a red-lettered edition. We are dealing, ladies and gentlemen, today with a red-lettered story, but not in the Gospels. This is all the way back into the book of Numbers. Wow, good stuff.
Now, hey, I was going to mention, I was going to kick off with verse 22, verse 4. But you have something before that. You wanted to bring something up before that, I think.
Yeah, let me just, I think in verse 3, according to the ASV, and Moab was sore afraid of the people because they were many, and Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. So the reason I wanted to bring this up at first is because this is not the first time we've seen Moab in fear, and it goes all the way back to the book of Exodus, Jono, and there's this strange section in Exodus 15. Now, this is considered to be, or thought to be, the song at the sea, when the children of Israel are delivered from Egypt and they cross over. Okay, so verse 13 begins a section which most scholars would have to admit looks like an anachronistic addition, an interpolation to the text, because it sounds like something much later in the history of Israel. For instance, verse 13, in your steadfast love, you led the people whom you redeemed. You guided them by your strength to your holy abode. Well, where is that? I mean, where's the holy abode? They're not there yet. The people heard, they trembled. Pangs seized the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. Trembling seized the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted away. Then it goes on and it talks about, that this dread fell upon them until they're planted on the mountain of God's own possession. Clearly a reference to, a much later planting. But it is interesting that it figures in the fear of the Moabites and the Edomites, if you will, that region. In other words, this is the last leg of the journey being described here, and how the fear we meet with in 22 is talked about already there.
I had not spotted that. That's really cool. I agree with you. And speaking of anachronistic language, Ross, in verse 4, so we have, now this is interesting. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. We have Moab said to the elders of Midian. We'll talk about that in a minute. But At the end of verse 4, it says, Balak, son of Zippor, was the king of Moab at that time.
Okay.
At that time?
At what time? Who's writing this?
Ross. Who's writing this? And so when are they writing it?
A contemporary writer would not be writing at that time. That's something that all the early discoverers of things like we're talking about here with the documentary hypothesis, that was one of the first things they saw were references like you just pointed out at that time. When you see that, everyone should go, wait a minute.
Wait a minute. When are you
Someone's writing at another time referring to this time. Good catch.
Once upon a time in a faraway land, there lived Balak, son of Zippor.
Once upon a time.
Now, he sent messages to Balaam, son of Peor, in Peor, which is by the Euphrates, in the land of his kinsfolk, to invite him and say, and now listen, where this
That's a long trip.
That's a long trip, right? So I was curious. I thought, how long is this? So I think kilometer-wise, it's like 680 Ks. That is a long trip. It's something like 400 miles, something, I don't know. But I thought, how long is it going to take to walk? And I mean, let's assume that they're on donkeys and they're a little bit faster than a walking pace, okay? But we're looking at about 100, in round figures, about 150-hour journey. That's if you're going nonstop. And if we allow maybe, I don't know, 6 hours a day of travel, we're talking about a roundabouts, a 6-week round trip, right? And so what we have is Balak sends his mates and goes, go and find Magic Man and tell him to come here because
he's waiting. Now, wait a minute. He's waiting patiently for 6 weeks for them to come back. And when he sees them coming, Jono, he's probably like, thank God, here come the people with
6 weeks.
Balaam.
Yeah. And they come and they say, he's not coming. I mean, and they go, they go there and Bill. Now, listen, I'm going to get back. Okay, I just want to talk to you about how we pronounce this guy's name, Balaam, but I'm going to stick with Balaam, and we'll come back to that. But he says, okay, stay the night, and then the next day he's like, no, we'll talk about that in a minute. They come all the way back. They say to Balak, he said no, and Balak's like, you guys, you didn't do it right. You didn't do it right. So he gets even more cooler guys and more of them, and he sends them, which is probably another 6-week round trip. So I'm just pointing out, and this may well be the case, this is fine, but they're there for at least 3 months, this time span, right, before this whole thing concludes, I think. Have I got that right? Is that fair?
Well, it depends on if this Peor near the river is this faraway place. But we also have to understand that someone could be putting him in a place that he doesn't belong. So then the reader, the Bible-believing person, the student here, has to decide, is it really a 6-week walk, as it would be if it is this Peor by the river, or could it be another location? Could it be much closer? And then the story could work geographically, like you could follow the sequence. And by the way, geography is very, very important here. We're going to talk about that throughout. I think it's real important. So I wonder if, I've often argued, as brilliant scholars that I've read have argued, places like Ur of the Chaldees is not in Babylonia, but north of the land of Canaan, where the rivers come, between the two rivers, if you will, the Tigris and the Euphrates. But they don't have to be in Babylonia, so it might be much closer. That's all I'm suggesting.
All right. Okay. Now listen, before we go any further, most references and everything that I read, it's Balaam. But in the Hebrew, as I see it, am I looking at Balaam? What?
Balaam. That's the way I would read it.
That's the way I read it. Why did we have Balaam? Where does that come from? Balaam.
Are they trying to make is that a rabbinic interpretation?
I don't know. I'm just confused. I was
hoping
hoping you would have the answer.
Well, I grew up in the South in the States, and I went to a Baptist church, and we called it Balaam. Balaam, baby. Yeah. Balaam.
Balaam, baby.
Yeah.
All right. Let's call him Balaam, because as far as I can see in the Hebrew, unless I'm getting something wrong. All right. So listen, as I mentioned, in chapter 22, verses 4 and 7, we see a Moabite Midianite collaboration, Ross.
Okay.
Which is interesting. And Ezra mentioned something about this as well. And that reminded me of the Moses scroll in DB7, where it says the daughters of Moab and the Midian and the women of Midian. And it made me wonder again, because I thought, because Guta looks at this and he goes, how is it that the Midianites, they go battle the Midianites and the Moabite, the daughters of the Moabites get off scot-free? What is this about?
Yeah.
And and one way of explaining it, I thought, was what's called a epexegetical vav, which is just like a vav which is used for emphasis rather than introducing a new category, right? The daughters of Moab are indeed the wives of the Midianites, and this is why they go and battle the Midianites. But here in the text, in our canonical text, there seems to be some sort of collaboration between the Moabites and the Midianites. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to add one thing. I've given a lot of thought to this, and it's a working hypothesis that I've not been able to prove yet. I have this idea quickly stated that the Midianites, like a lot of maps, are going to show Midian in, the region kind of where our modern day Saudi Arabia is. The Midianites, that's where you go. That's where Midian is. And people, especially who want to place Mount HOREB at, in Saudi Arabia today, that's where they go. But I see Midian quite often as a traveling, migratory, sort of a Bedouin type group. And here's a verse I wanted to bring up, and it's in Genesis 36:35. Now, this is a section you brought up the other day where it talks about the kings that reigned in the land of Edom before any king over the children of Israel. I don't remember how we got into that, but anyway. But Bala, the son of Peor, reigned in Edom, which I think is an interesting name. Bala, son of Peor. But anyway, but notice the location. And then when you get to verse 35, Husham died, and Hadad, the son of Bedad, who smote Midian in the field of Moab, reigned in his stead.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the reason I bring that up is simply to show that at least as in this text, which is obviously an anachronistic text and put into Genesis at a much later period, sometime in the monarchy, in fact.
Sure.
But notice it's got Midian in the field of Moab. So the Midianites and the Moabites seem to be together. But again, we're not talking about ancient times. We're talking about, well, it's ancient, but it's clearly in the monarchical period.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, no, I like that. 22 verse 9, it has, God came to Balaam and said, what do these people want? Right? It's almost like, Ross, it's interesting the way that this Torah portion imagines God. He's like in the next room, my mate Balaam's got visitors, I'll just, you do your thing, man, and I'll just go and have a cup of tea.
Right.
And when they're gone, God comes out and says, hey, so what do they want? What's that about?
Yeah. Yeah, what, did I miss anything?
Did I miss anything? What's going on? Fill me in, man. Come on. Now, in 22, 18 to 20, this is where I want to bring in 4Q.
By the way, he does tell him, doesn't he?
He tells him, in verse 10, Balaam says to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is a people that came out of Egypt and hides the earth from view. They're covering the earth. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage with them in battle and drive them out. But God said to Balaam, don't go. Yeah, you must not curse those people, for they are blessed. All right? He's like, all right, I'm not going to do that.
And now, so Balaam follows it. He says, I'm not going to go.
Told. He's doing what he's told, right? And and according to Balaam, by the way, Jehovah is his God. Okay, so they're mates. They talk to each other candidly, like Moses, face to face, it would appear. And and Balaam just does what he's told. Okay, fine.
And this is, by the way, where this is, I don't want to jump ahead of you, but this in verse 14 is where after he tells the princes of Moab that he's not going to go, that's where they rise up and they go back, however long it takes them to get back to Balak, and they say, he refuses to come.
Not coming?
He's not coming.
So he sent other dignitaries more numerous and distinguished. You guys aren't cool enough. We have to appeal to his sense of, dignity and, got to stroke his ego a little bit. So he sends him cooler people.
Yep.
And they came to Balaam and said to him, "Thus says Balak, son of Zippor, please do not refuse to come with me. I will reward you richly and will do anything that you ask of me. Only come and damn." This is what I have in the JPS. Damn this people for me. All right. So now what we have in 4Q27 Numbers, it continues, and this concurs with the canonical text. It goes on to say, Balaam answered the servants of Balak, "If Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I can't go beyond the word of Jehovah my God to do less or more." Now that's what it says in the canonical text. And then 4Q27 adds, "in my heart." It says, I cannot do less or more in my heart. So this is where the magic happens.
In the heart.
In the heart. This is, he I don't know, he imagines this in his heart, or he pronounces certain things in his heart, and that enacts the blessing or the curse. At least this is what 4Q27 would have us believe. And then it goes on in verse 19, "Now therefore stay here tonight as well, you guys, you cooler guys, that I may know."
Especially since you just walked that long way.
Yeah,
you can spend one more night.
It's 3 weeks, dude. The least you can do is spend the night. "That I may know what else Jehovah will speak to me." And then the text adds in 4Q27 Numbers, "And the princes of Moab stayed with Balaam." Okay, well, that's a given. We knew that anyway. But what's interesting is the way that verse 20 starts. It begins this way. Let me read it in the canonical text. It says, "That night God came to Balaam and said, 'If these men have come to invite you, you may go with them, but whatever I command you, that you shall do.'" But what it says, Ross, in 4Q27 Numbers is, in verse 20, "An angel of Elohim came to Balaam at night and said to him." So that is curious. Now, again, we have a mixing of E and J. One of them is more excited about angels than the other.
Well, let me jump in, though. I tell you, it's interesting because I could see how angel might have been in the original text.
Yeah.
You say, well, why?
That's what
because
I'm saying,
in just a minute, we're going to meet the angel of the Lord.
That's exactly my point. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So
all right,
it gets you thinking. It gets you thinking, and which came first? How did this evolve? And then what was extracted from the final form? And these questions go on forever. Chapter 22, verse. But go ahead.
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead, but this.
Go on.
No, I'll wait. We'll wait because when we start talking about this angel of Jehovah, then we get into why does this time God said don't go with them before. Now he says go with them. But if this is the angel that we see in a few minutes that stands in the way,
it's problematic. Okay. Now, not only that, Ross, but this verse, verse 20, God, the angel of God, is 4Q27 Numbers would have us believe, came to Balaam and said, if these men, again, God doesn't know things here. They're discussing the situation. If these men have come to invite you, then you may go with them. But whatever I command you, that you shall do. Balaam seems to have no problem with that. So here we are. He arose the next morning, Ross. Balaam saddled his donkey and departed with the Moabite dignitaries. But Elohim was incensed at his going. So an angel of Jehovah placed himself in his way as a Satan.
He is a Satan. And look, by the way, that's also in verse 32. So twice, Jono, we have the angel of the Lord is as a Satan. So now that we've introduced that idea, which many of our viewers, very biblically literate viewers that we have, know this already, but here's the thing. If verse 20 was the angel instead of Elohim here, then quite possibly the same Satan is testing Balaam, because prior, remember, God said, don't go. Don't go. You can't go. Don't go. And you can't
That's
curse
the first
people.
guys. The first guys don't go. They're not cool enough. And then Balak sends cooler guys. And he's like, okay, so if they're asking you to go, then go with them. So he gets ready to go with them because they're asking him to go, and then an angel of the Lord is like, "What are you doing, dude? What the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Come on!" So Satan now the plot thickens, Ross, very quickly. Okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to add that we have to watch. One of the things that we start seeing quite a bit is the word which I speak into you, that you shall do. In various ways, we get this. God's word, he says, I can't go beyond what God puts in my mouth. We're going to see that phrase over and over and over. And I think it's important because this is something we've not really met with yet, and we won't meet with, at least biblically, until Deuteronomy 18, which is part of that law code, which gets into what is a prophet. The only exception of God's word being put in the mouth that appears before this is Exodus 4 and Exodus 7, where Moses is to, he's going to speak, and then Aaron is going to be his prophet and so forth. But this is interesting because this is someone that's not an Israelite, and we get the same idea that's being presented.
Yeah, I know it. Anyway, so 22 verse 40, they finally hang on, before all of that, we've got the talking donkey. Good heavens.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just jumped right over a talking donkey?
Just jumped over a talking donkey. No, so we're... like I said, the plot thickens. All of a sudden, we throw Satan into the mix here. That's great. But then all of a sudden, the talking donkey. He's on his way. Satan opposes him on the road. Only the donkey can see him. And he's there with a flaming sword about to slice Balaam in half. And the donkey's like, yeah, I don't want that on me. And sort of veers off the road. And Balaam starts beating him. So rather. Beating the donkey and beat it three times. I think this happens until this is so weird. So God's like, okay, I'm going to open the donkey's mouth, and the donkey's like, hi, I'm Mr. Ed, or Mrs. Ed in this case,
right?
And she says, look, haven't I been a good donkey to you all of this time? I've been loyal and served you well, taken you from A to B.
Been a good donkey.
I've been a good donkey. Stop beating me. What the? I'm only trying to save your life from Satan over here that wants to cut you in half. And
Balaam answers. Balaam answers like it's not.
Ross.
He doesn't.
It's not even weird.
Did you just speak to me? No, he says, yeah, you've been a good donkey. You certainly have. And so he starts to reason with the donkey.
He's reasoning with the donkey.
Interesting.
And then not only so. God, and I think it does say that God opened the donkey's mouth, right? And
absolutely, it says that.
And then it says that God opens Balaam's eyes. Yep. And then when his
verse
eyes
28.
are open, verse 28, is that where we are?
That's where he opens the donkey's mouth. And then,
what have you done? You keep beating me. Stop beating me. And then the Lord, Jehovah, uncovered Balaam's eyes, this is 31, and he saw the angel of Jehovah standing in the way. This is Satan. Standing in the way, sword drawn, his angel spirit sword in his hand. Thereupon he bowed right down to the ground. The angel of the Lord said to him, why have you beaten your donkey? He's standing there watching this happen, and it's because, well, I'll tell you why, because my donkey could see you about to slice me in half, and so the donkey's walking off, and I can't see you. Should that be a surprise to you?
But the donkey also ran his foot against the wall too, though.
Well, donkey's going to do it.
You don't know how mad you can get until your donkey does that.
Now, listen, I would probably beat the donkey too. I mean, if the donkey's been a good donkey up until this point, then it starts doing weird things because God is playing hide and seek with me. I mean, this is kind of a game that God is playing with him. He's like, I'll let
the angel. It's the angel.
Well, it's Satan sent by God. But God, right, has gone, I'm going to let the donkey see Satan, but I'm not going to let Balaam see Satan. And then this will be, hey, you guys, watch what happens. This will be good. And
it is a strange tale.
Then we have that. Then he opens the donkey's mouth, and then the donkey speaks, and that's not weird at all. And then he opens Balaam's eyes, and then it's like, see, this is the reason why. But then Satan is taunting him, going, why were you beating the donkey? As if, like, stop hitting yourself, dude. Stop hitting yourself. It's kind of like that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't know. Anyway.
Hey, let me ask you here. When I was more of a fundamentalist, I would have been offended to think that someone didn't think this literally happened. Like that the donkey
Oh,
actually spoke.
I'm
You know
glad
what I'm
you
saying?
brought that
So
up. I had a conversation with
yeah,
someone. To your point, I remember having maybe you had similar conversations, but I remember it was actually an Orthodox Jew, and he said, so you believe, the Tanakh? Yeah, I believe the Tanakh. I mean, this is in my fundamentalist days. He
yeah,
said, what, you believe it literally? And I said, yeah, I believe it all. I believe this is the word of God.
right.
I'm not a Talmud guy, but the Tanakh. He said, do you believe that a donkey spoke? And I said, well, do you believe that a snake spoke in the garden? And I'm thinking, yes, why not? Why not? I
Yeah,
mean, we see parrots talk, so, but now I
yeah.
look at this and I'm like, what? But, okay, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I would just add, what if, imagine, let's say that we meet with the author of this text, and just for the sake of argument, let's say it's Moses.
Hmm.
And we say, Moses, when you wrote the story, did you write the story of Balaam? And let's say Moses said, absolutely, I wrote it. It's in the book of Numbers. I wrote it. Yeah, sure. And I'd say, did that really happen? Did the donkey actually speak? Did you mean for us to take that literally? And then you've got one or two options here. One, Moses would say, did you really think that I intended for that to be taken literally? It's just a story, Ross, or the other option is absolutely it happened.
Yeah,
Now, here's the question. Who was there to witness this? That's the other question we have to consider.
exactly.
Even if we're a fundamentalist, or if some of the viewers are fundamentalists, and they believe that this
Who
actually
recorded it?
happened the way,
Yeah.
who recorded it?
Who recorded
Yeah.
it?
How did
That is the
Moses,
question.
if Moses is the one that wrote it, how did he get this information from Balaam? Did they interview him before they chop off his head in Numbers 31?
Right.
You know?
This is exactly. Did they write down all of it? And then what happened? Oh, and then the donkey. Okay, and then what happened? Oh, there was the say. Okay, who
And
recorded this? Okay,
so,
now this is clearly a
so by
story.
the way, now the angel of Jehovah says to go with the men,
Yes, verse 35.
and
After
then
all of that,
Balaam says after all that, look, if you're mad, I'll just go back.
yeah.
No. Go ahead and go. Because it's really
Well, then what
confusing.
was this
He
all
said, don't
for?
go. Don't
What
go.
was-
And then he's going to go. And then he's not going to go. And then he says, well, if you're mad, I won't go. No. Go ahead and go. It's just back and forth.
It's neither here nor there for me. I was quite happy on the Euphrates, wherever I was. If you want, you said to go. Here I am going.
Mhm.
Now you want to chop me in half and then play games with me, playing hide and seek, and now you're saying that you were going to kill me, but to go anyway. I can go home if you want. I just want to keep you happy.
No. Don't go.
All right, fine.
Don't do that.
All right, so we're going to keep going, and that's verse 35. And then Balak heard that Balaam was coming, and he went out to meet him at Ir Moab, which is on the Arnon border. Okay, so now we're on the Arnon border. Okay,
Mhm.
at its furthest point. Okay, so maybe this is the boundaries of Moab. Balak said to Balaam, when I first sent to invite you, why didn't you come to me?
Yeah.
I'm really unable to. Am I not able to reward you? And Balaam said to Balak, and now that I have come to you, have I the power to speak freely? I can only utter the word that God puts into my mouth.
Here we go. This is the phrase, and we see this in various forms throughout this text. He is, for all intents and purposes, a prophet. And of course we know that, but this is very clearly stated here. To have someone put the words in the mouth is something that we see over and over in the Hebrew Bible, and I just find that to be interesting. Yeah.
Then they have a barbecue, Ross. They have a barbecue because it's a long journey after all, and you've got all the dignitaries and all of this sort of stuff. So they have a barbie. Mm-hmm. Then he says to Balaam says to Balak, "Hey, I'm going to need some stuff. All right, I got a list. Build me 7 altars at this place over here, this high place. Give me 7 oxen and 7 sheep, and we're going to sacrifice." And it seems like this is the necessary conditions by which he obtains the oracle. Is that how you see it?
Maybe so. Just as a side note, and I don't want to belabor it, but do you think this reminds me a little bit of the story in 1 Kings 18 and the challenge between Elijah and the prophets of Baal? And we're dealing with Baal as well. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's not an exact match, obviously, but there is this challenge, and there's somehow drawing God to the sacrifices. Like the ancient world has gods like flies around these sacrifices. So here you've got seven. He's going to do this several times, right?
Got to do the 7. And here we have, just one more time, I think, just a couple of interesting, curious differences between our canonical text and 4Q 27 numbers. So I'll just read that to you. And this is from verse 3. This concurs with the canonical text. It begins, Balaam said to Balak, stand by your burnt offering, and I will go. Perhaps, in our canonical text, it says, perhaps Jehovah will come and meet me. Perhaps Jehovah will manifest himself before me. In 4Q 27 numbers, it says, perhaps Elohim will meet me. Whatever he shows me, I will tell you. And then 4Q 27 adds, and Balak went and stood by his burnt offering, and Balaam called to Elohim. He said, or it might be, yeah, and then it returns to the canonical text. He went to a bare height. And then verse 4 adds one more time, an angel of Elohim met Balaam. So once again,
that is interesting.
It is interesting, isn't it? So once again, it's the angel, and said to him, he said to me, hey, listen, I've done all the things. I've prepared 7 altars. I've offered up a bull and a ram on every altar. Now, fill me in. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just still thinking about. I've made a couple of notes since you've some of the things that you brought up. The red lettered thing has me thinking, and this angel of God, which is at least in our canonical text presented le Satan for Satan. So it makes me think if this is the angel, and the angel's still in and out of the story at times as an adversary, then what are we dealing with here?
Yeah, very, very curious.
It takes up a parable. Are you at verse 7 yet?
Yeah. And so from verse 7 to verse 10, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, one thing I wanted to bring up, and it's sort of a side note, but it's in the ASV, it says, the king of Moab, this is part of this parable, the king of Moab from the mountains of the east, come curse me, Jacob, and come defy Israel. Curse and defy, Jono, and it's interesting. Number one, mountains of the east could be ancient mountains, which the reason I bring that up is if you look at Deuteronomy 33, Deuteronomy 33:15, if you go to the Hebrew, this is the only other place where we get a form of this where it talks about the mountains of what is translated the East
ancient
Kedem.
Mountains I have.
Yeah.
Hills of immemorial.
Yeah. So 33:15, is that right? Yeah.
That's what I got.
Let me look at it. So anyway, for what it's worth, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then curse and defy. Those two phrases remind me of some of what we see in the news today. There's a tendency of many people who have come out against Israel, and there's both of these words, not only just to curse, but the word Zayin, Ayin, Mem. Interesting word, but it defy is probably a good way to put it, and that's what they're doing. They're cursing and defying Israel.
I'll tell you what I found interesting about this, and that is verse 10. The question in verse 10, who can count the dust of Jacob, number the dust cloud of Israel? We have a very recent answer to that, and that's, Moses and Aaron. There's a number of census that's taken in the book of Numbers. Of course, 1 verse 3, it says, Jehovah is made to say to Moses, you Moses and Aaron shall record them. And they go ahead and they do that. The 12 tribes and the Levites as well. So that's the answer to that question, I guess.
Yeah, of course, he doesn't have that information, though, Jono. Remember, he's Balaam. He doesn't have their census data.
Quite right.
So he's looking at just this big crowd, and it's probably pretty intimidating, especially if it's numbering close to 2 million or so.
I agree, but if Moses is supposed to be the writer of this narrative, Ross,
yeah, I know. I guess that's
there we are. One more time, look at this. Okay, now this time it's not an addition, but something that's missing. This section is a little bit odd, and I'm about to jump to chapter 24. Is there anything else that you want to highlight in chapter 23?
Just one more, verse 12. He answered, "Must I not take heed to speak that which Jehovah putteth in my mouth?"
Again, yeah.
So again, we keep meeting that. And then look down at verse 16. Jehovah met Balaam, whatever that looked like, and put a word in his mouth. So, we just keep seeing this over and over and over.
That's a little bit Isaiah-y, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly feels
or is it,
like.
Am I thinking of Ezekiel to put a word in his mouth?
Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 9, Jeremiah modeled off of the Deuteronomic writer, says that he touched the hand and put his words in my mouth. But you're right, yeah. Isaiah says the same thing. And, the one who has, 59:21, Isaiah. Interesting. Yep.
So, and just to your point on 15 to 16, Balaam said to Balak, "Stay here beside your offering and this is what I have in the JPS, while I seek a manifestation yonder." I like the way it says that. And Jehovah manifested himself to Balaam and put a word in his mouth. So, again, some sort of theophany, some sort of personal theophany, which is, again, it's just an interesting way to consider how the writer views God. All right, so he gives another oracle. You can read that there. We can't cover everything, good heavens. All right.
What about God is not a man, neither the son of man? This is some good stuff here. Just to bring it up.
Yes, verse 19. Where is it?
Verse 19, that's right.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
There you go, that's right. And also, we see, before I jump to 24, I just see here in verse 28, Balak took Balaam to the peak of Peor. So we're going to, obviously, we're going to be talking about Peor a little bit later in this narrative, but I think maybe this is the first time that's mentioned, which overlooks the wasteland, overlooks the wilderness.
Okay. I got to back up a little bit. I know we've got a lot to cover, and we've been going for a while, but because I want to do that too. But let me tell you, this is just a bit of trivia for people, a little bit of history. What hath God wrought? Verse 23. What hath God wrought? And the reason that this is important, Jono, is because the first telegraph from Samuel Morse in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., to Alfred Vail in Baltimore, he sent a telegraph, the very first one, 24 May 1844, and it said, "What hath God wrought?" And the person that gave him the recommendation, he's asking his friends, "Hey, this has got to be something big. I'm going to send the first telegraph. What should it say?" And Annie Ellsworth, write this down, viewers, Annie Ellsworth, is there a reason that you think, and put this in the comments, why would Annie Ellsworth come up with a quote from the words of Balaam?
Yeah, why?
Just something, interesting. I want people to, it's their homework.
It's a homework.
But isn't that cool?
Some research. Put it in the comments. Put it in the comments, because I don't know the answer to that question. That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
And one more current event. This is how, think about this. The words of Balaam not only were associated with the first telegraph, but here's something else. Verse 24, "Behold, the people riseth up as a lioness, and as a lion doth he lift himself up," so forth. This was the name of the Operation Rising Lion, just recently in the news. And Benjamin Netanyahu wrote part of this verse and from a pagan prophet and put it in the wall. And that was the name of the operation. Cool. There you go. Now I'm ready to jump into Peor.
That is cool. All right, I'm going to jump into chapter 24, verses 3 and 4. Just again, something that is extracted from 4Q27 numbers. So what we have in verse 3 is, and this concurs with the canonical text, "He took up his parable and said, Balaam, son of Peor, says, the man whose eyes are open says, And then verse 4 in our canonical text says, he says, who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty. Now, even in our canonical text, Ross, these verses seem disjointed, and they seem like two traditions or two narratives trying to, fix together. But what is missing in 4Q27 is in verse 4, he says who hears the words of God. So the way that it reads is Balaam, son of Peor, the man whose eyes are open, says who sees the vision of the Almighty. So it's just missing a line. Curious, worth mentioning. But what I found even more curious is what we find in verse 7, Ross. What do we have?
Wait.
Oh.
No, I can't go there yet.
Right.
Sorry. Look at verse 5.
All right, what we got?
Matovu ohaleka Yaakov mishkanoteka Yisrael. This particular passage from Balaam is chanted in synagogue services. How goodly, let's see how the English puts it, how goodly are thy tents, O Jacob, thy tabernacles, O Israel. Matovu. Now that, I've got to jump all the way to Micah chapter 6. Because if you look at Micah 6, this happens to be the Haftarah. But if you look at verse 5, O my people, remember now what King Balak of Moab devised, what Balaam, son of Peor, answered him, and what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the saving acts of the Lord. Now, interestingly enough, Shittim is the last stop east of the Jordan, in Transjordan, and Gilgal is the first stop on the west for the children of Israel. But this is where it's all tied together. We just saw that the words of Balaam were matovu, and if you do a search on that phrase, you'll see matov, what is good. And if you look at verse 8, same context, he told you, O man, matov. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love loving kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? So Micah 6 is tied. It seems that the writer of Micah 6 knows of the story of Balak and Balaam, and even more so by tying in a particular phrase, maybe, for what it's worth.
You know what's curious too, and we don't have time even to go into this, but verse 7, I've just spotted, with myriads of streams of oil shall I give my firstborn for my transgression. Says, overlap with the Deir Alla inscription. Kind of touches on those themes as well. Anyway, all right. Coming back to chapter 24, verse 7. This is a massive anachronism. What is going on here, Ross? Their boughs drip with moisture. The roots have abundant water. Their king shall rise above Agag. Their kingdom shall be exalted. Agag? Agag.
Hey. Wait a minute. Hold on just a second.
Hang on a minute.
Who is Agag? Why does that name sound familiar?
He is the king of the of Amalek, whom Saul battled with and spared, and kept some of the cattle and whatnot, the sheep for.
It can't be the same guy, Jono. That's not what's going on.
Whom Samuel came and hacked to pieces with a sword in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 32 to 33. Well, if it's not the same Agag, who is it?
I don't know.
Could be another Agag.
Maybe.
We don't know.
I don't know. Man, you're giving me all kind of stuff to check on.
Well, it's reminiscent of your passage in Exodus chapter 15. It just sort of throws in an anachronism. If it happened there, it can certainly happen here. And I would suggest that is the case. Also, what we have in verse 9, Ross, and that is they crouch, they lie down like a lion. I think in 4Q27, I think it says stretches like a lion. The king of the beasts who dare rouse him. Blessed are they who bless you, and cursed are they who curse you, which is very reminiscent of Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, which I think is a J source, I think. Very interesting. All right.
Yep.
What else have we got?
Well, I tell you, now, it depends on when you want to jump into, if you want to talk about Peor here, there, or elsewhere. I'm fine wherever.
We can do that, and here we find ourselves overlapping with the Moses Scroll. But I tell you what else overlaps with the Moses Scroll indirectly, and that is verse 17 of this chapter. I found interesting. Verse 17 and 18, it says, "What I see for them is not yet; what I behold will not be soon. A star rises from Jacob; a scepter comes forth from Israel. It smashes the brow of Moab, the foundation of all the children of Seth. Edom becomes a possession. Seir, a possession of his enemies, but Israel is triumphant. A victor is," and it goes on. Is it, now, verse 18, for example, Ross, is it saying that Israel is going to possess Seir, Edom? Is that what it
looks like?
Seems to be what it's saying.
And by the way, the star and scepter, just to touch it, and we can ask Ezra, or we can talk a little bit more about it, but the star and scepter are attributed to at least messianic predictions. So is that the way you understand it, that whoever this figure is, the star, the scepter, that person will lead the exaltation over Edom and Seir, and I don't know. I mean, it certainly feels like it's written as a prophecy to predict the subjugation of these peoples.
That's right. And
it's describing something the writer sees.
That's right. And the reason why I found this interesting, Ross, is because, and 4Q27 includes these texts, but we find it in Deuteronomy and it's derived from the Moses Scroll. And the Moses Scroll has Elohim saying to Moses, "Hey, listen, you're going to be skirting the border." We talked about this last week, skirting the border of Edom and Moab. Don't mess with those guys. Don't hassle them. Don't contend with them in battle, because I didn't give their land as a possession for you. I gave it to them as a possession for the sons of Lot. But here it's saying, hey, Edom becomes a possession and Seir a possession for itself. So it's inconsistent, is my point. This prophecy here. All right. So now the matter of Peor. Ross, go ahead.
Hey, let me ask Ezra. Let me jump in and let Ezra set this up for us to discuss the matter of Peor, the Baal Peor, the Beit Peor. Can we ask Ezra to weigh in? Let's see what Ezra knows about this.
Peor. Now there's a name that threads through multiple biblical texts like a warning siren. Let's unpack this a bit, because Baal Peor, Beth Peor, and the matter of Peor aren't just names. They're theological pressure points in the narrative of Israel's relationship with Yahweh. We first meet Baal Peor in Numbers, right after Balaam's failed attempts to curse Israel. The text says Israel yoked themselves to Baal of Peor, a deity tied to Moabite or possibly Midianite cultic worship. And it's not just about bowing to an idol. This is a full-blown fertility cult, complete with ritual sex, which in ancient Canaanite religion was seen as a way to stimulate divine blessing. From the Israelite priestly viewpoint, this is the worst-case scenario. It's not just idolatry, it's covenantal betrayal. Now, Beth Peor, or House of Peor, is probably a localized sanctuary site in Moab, east of the Jordan. Deuteronomy mentions it as a geographical anchor, a kind of scar in the land's memory. It's where the transgression happened, and the site becomes symbolically loaded. Even after the event, it remains a landmark of apostasy. Think of it like a cautionary tale etched into the map. Then, there's the matter of Peor, a phrase that echoes in later texts like Joshua and Hosea. In those contexts, it's shorthand for rebellion. The phrase isn't just historical, it's theological. It signals a moment when Israel willingly aligned itself with foreign gods and suffered divine wrath as a result. It's invoked to explain later calamities, almost like a national trauma that never quite heals. From a scholarly angle, this episode likely reflects polemics against syncretism. The priestly and Deuteronomistic editors are drawing a hard line. Israel must remain distinct. Baal worship was real and attractive and local, so the matter of Peor becomes a narrative warning against assimilating Canaanite religious practices. In short, Peor isn't just a place or a god, it's a fault line in the covenant story. The name itself becomes a theological symbol for what happens when Israel forgets who it is.
What do you think about that, Jono? What are your thoughts on this?
I'm inclined to agree with most of that from Ezra, and I think that fairly perhaps reflects our narrative here in chapter 25 up to verse 9. It wants us to believe that that they engaged in the worship of a god called Baal Peor. But there are inconsistencies, Ross, with the telling of this tale, because we have this cited in other places like Deuteronomy, for example, and some of it in the Moses Scroll, and as Ezra says, Hosea brings this up as well. And they don't all agree. There are inconsistencies, and one of those inconsistencies is whether or not Baal Peor is a god, or if Baal Peor is a location. And I tend to side with the latter. Yes, they were probably worshipping foreign gods. That the daughters of Moab, the women of Midian, enticed the men into engaging with them in whatever ritual they were performing. But is Beit Peor and Baal Peor, is Baal Peor a god or is it a location? I tend to go with the latter. What are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to ask you, could it be both? And the reason I say that, I'm looking at the English of the Moses Scroll. I can easily look at the Hebrew as well. But it appears, at least from DB6, and I know you know this, through DC3, this small section here covers the story as we see it as a potential for the source of these other tales which were later expanded. But it begins with dwelling in front of Beit Peor, which is clearly a place, but then later, and you were joined to Baal Peor in that day. The reason I'm wondering, because I see the same thing that you're pointing out here. I've got, let's see, Baal Peor as, what we see a potential, and then we have Beit Peor, and it could be one or the other, but I'm wondering if you have Peor is the name of the place, and then Beit Peor represents perhaps a temple or a shrine of some sort, or even conversely, it could be one. It could be the Beit Peor is the place and Baal Peor is the shrine. Could be that as well. Could be. Or as you say, it could be later that Baal is added. But the idea, at least as I understood it, I remember when I was working through this in the Moses Scroll, it felt like it presented both a place and a deity of that place, maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, so as Ezra said, Joshua chapter 22, verse 17, I think it is, refers to the sin at Peor, but it leaves out the Beit or the Baal. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 3, it says, your eyes have seen what Jehovah did at Baal Peor, so it's a location there. Hosea chapter 9, verse 10, it says, they came to Baal Peor, so it's a location there as well, and they devoted themselves to shame. Numbers, even in Numbers, we have 25:18 refers geographically to the matter of Peor, but it refers to that twice rather than Baal Peor as a divine entity. So it's curious. But then, Ross, we have places like Baal Meon, for example, is mentioned in the Mesha as well, but it's called Beit Baal Meon in Joshua 13:17. So which is it? Could it be both one and the same? It's also mentioned in Numbers, in Ezekiel and Chronicles. And then we have places like Bamot Baal, that's Numbers 22.
High place of,
Baal Gad, Baalah, Kiryat Baal, Baalat Beir, Mount Baal Hermon, Beit Baal Berit, Baal Tamar, Baal Perazim, Baal Judah, Baal
big question. The big question is, yes, these are places, but why would they have a name associated, Baal, with that place? And that becomes the question, I think. It could be, that's the reason I say it could be both. You could have a place. Clearly, Baal Peor is a place because it's also referred to at times as Beit Peor, sometimes just Peor, the slopes of Peor, whatever. But it makes me wonder that, because one of my questions was, at what time frame do we see Baal? And clearly we have Baal around at this time. So that god, that deity is known in various places in the ancient arena that we're dealing with. So I wonder.
And
if
we
it's
also
both.
know, and you're probably right. Like that's probably I think that's the common way that it is that it's used and intended. But of course, we know that Baal is also. I mean, it means master, and it is used in that sense as well. And could it be Ba'et Peor, and you are joined to the master of Peor? And what does that mean? But there is in it, but it's problematic. I have to say, particularly in the Moses Scroll. This particular pericope bothers me because it seems to be inconsistent theologically. That is to say that there is a monotheism that is put forth in the Moses Scroll, particularly when you come to the first and second commandment. Don't be making idols, just don't be making idols. And also, by the way, I created all the things. So
then let me ask you though. So then, would that explain why, if this is a Baal, a foreign god that they've worshipped, the very next verse in the Moses Scroll says, "And the anger of Elohim burned against them."
That's right.
So in my mind, that's why I thought, well, maybe that's what's going on here. Is he clearly states,
but in what way? So that my question becomes: so that's fine, but in what way are they joined to a non-existent? To a false god? In what way are they joined? What has transpired here? This is my question.
Well, what are your thoughts there? Well, the main point is if there are no other gods, then why? And I believe that there aren't. But at the same time, there are commandments against worshiping other gods and making other gods.
Which is fine, but how do you join yourself to something that is non-existent? That's the question,
right?
And I find that difficult to reconcile. I guess is what I'm saying. But just on that, I mean, we have also the Anchor commentary that says this is their view. Baal Peor is a place and not a god. Named the house of Baal Peor, Beit Baal Peor. It refers to a place sacred to the god. Just who Baal Peor, the Lord of Peor, is not altogether clear, but he is simply not simply to be equated with the great Canaanite Baal. Peor most likely is just a place name, is what the Anchor has. So there's two lines of thought here.
I've seen both lines of thought, and that's the good thing about this stuff is it could be that Anchor is right or maybe Anchor's wrong. Because like I said, we have a lot of examples. It's clearly a location. A location is intended, and this particular text is clearly making a point of geographical location. So that's that's one thing. But something that happened there, the matter of Peor,
something that happened there,
really, really drove. And then you say, well, what does it mean to join? Well, it's interesting. I'd have to look at the Hebrew more.
Yokes is probably more specifically the word.
Is it the same word where Israel is, where it talks about that God joined himself to this people? Is it the same word? I mean, that would be something interesting to me.
Yeah,
because in that sense, they could be joining themselves to a God that's not real or not there or whatever.
Well,
but these ancient people clearly had other gods.
It's interesting that you bring that up. And again, Hosea talks about the idolatry of Ephraim. I think I can't remember the exact verse. But it talks about a joining, but it's a different word. It talks about some sort of alliance there, and it's a different word. What I wonder, because I want to give, for example, I've always looked at the text in the Moses Scroll, and I think, okay, if I give it the benefit of the doubt, how might we interpret this that might not be a traditional view, but a permissible interpretation, as far as the Hebrew will allow. And I've entertained a few different scenarios. One of those is that perhaps the Midianite men sent their wives purposefully to entice the Israelite men, get them drunk, get them involved in this idolatry. And it says, and you whored with the Midianite women. Well, what happens when you whore with the Midianite women? What kind of contraceptive did they have? Let me just speak very plainly. Is it possible, and was it the intent, that they take Israelite seed and produce Israelite children? And in that way, they coerce, if you like, an allegiance or an alliance. In that way, are they joined to Baal Peor? I mean, what else happens when they hoard with the Midianite women? This is one possibility. Another possibility is, oh, good heavens! I mean, I've I've entertained all manner of things. I mean, we also have after it says that they brought back many captives. And I thought, is that in keeping with the text? To go and battle the Midianite men and bring back captives? I mean, we don't see that in any other victory that is mentioned in the Moses scroll. But here, for some reason, we bring back captives. Is that because the women that they hoard with are carrying their seed? Are we bringing them back? Or are we returning captives, men who have gone and were taken captive, perhaps hostage, in a drunken stupor during this whole event? It can be interpreted that way as well. There's a couple of ways that you could do this to try and make it, a little less jarring, perhaps. But then there's another question, Ross, in all of this, and that question is, why is the Moses scroll, the details of the Moses scroll, why does this not appear? Why is it expunged from the account in Deuteronomy? What are your thoughts in that?
Why is what?
Why does it not appear in Deuteronomy? We have a reference in Deuteronomy chapter 4, which mentions very, very briefly the situation in the matter of Peor, if you like. And I think it's, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse, do you have it?
3. I tell you.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, right. If we're running a long time today, so we just have to look in, how do we want it? Because we're going to be in Deuteronomy 4 not long from now. But go ahead.
Yeah, going to be. But I'm just going to plant it in people's heads. You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did in the matter of Baal Peor, that the Lord your God wiped out from among you every person who followed Baal Peor, while you, who held fast to the Lord your God, are alive today. And that's it. It deals with it in one verse. So,
right.
So the question is, if Deuteronomy is, and we know that it lifts an enormous amount of information from the Moses scroll, why does it not take this piece as well? Very, very curious. But
it is curious. And one thing that I love to do is when we look at these stories as they're related in whether it's E, J, or what is considered the priestly source, and compare that with the account in Deuteronomy, which is often very close to what we see in the Moses scroll, and or we look at the way that they compare and contrast between the stories, whether that's the story of the spies, we have different details, whether it mentions or does not mention Jethro or one of his other names. There are clearly differences in the tellings of these stories.
Yes.
So it certainly is curious.
That is my point. So as we began our Torah portion, we speculated that this appears as maybe 2, 3, or 4 traditions, narratives that have sort of woven themselves together. And where does the Moses scroll fit into that? Was this something that the scribe might have added in there as a developing story, a very, very early version of the story, or
late breaking news? Yeah.
Or is this actually the original account that Moses recorded in the Moses scroll, and everything else here is sort of added around that? This is the question. But I tell you what, it's pretty rough though. It's even more jarring as it appears in our canonical text, where it says that they were whoring with the Midianite women. They took part in the sacrifices to their God. The people took part in the worship of that God. They attached themselves to Baal Peor. God was incensed with them. The Lord said to Moses, take all the ringleaders and have them publicly impaled, is what I have before the Lord, so that the Lord's wrath may turn away from Israel. So Moses said, yep, do that. So they did that. And then one of the Israelites came with a Midianite woman over to his companions in the sight of Moses, the whole community of Israel. And Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, decided this is not on. It's not. Now, Moses didn't do this. Pinchas did, right? He takes the matter into his own hands, literally with a spear, goes in and stabs them both, impales them both through. So really, he's just extending that the command that he'd given to Jehovah gave to Moses, go and impale these guys. Pinchas says, well, here's another one fresh off the press. I'll go and impale him and his girlfriend. And then it says, then the plague against the Israelites was checked. But we don't have a plague, Ross, do we? No plague says, nowhere does it say that a plague began, but it says those who died in the plague numbered 24,000. That's a lot of whoring. That's a lot of whoring, got to say. And but we do have something in Psalm 106. Do you have that? 106.
What verse?
Psalm 106, verse 28, I think it is. Yeah. Verse 28, they attached themselves to Baal Peor. They ate sacrifices offered to the dead. They provoked, in verse 29, they provoked anger by their deeds, and a plague broke out among them. So Psalm 106 cites that a plague broke out, and that seems, Jill, just going back to our Moses scroll, the way that it reads there, because we have, I sent men to battle you against... it says, DB10, and the anger of Elohim burned upon you, and he plagued a great plague against you at that time. Numbers doesn't record that. Go ahead.
But there's, as you point out, and as you allude here in Psalm 106, there's no mention of Balaam, is there? Nor is there a mention of Balaam in the story that we find in the Moses scroll. What is interesting, though, is that we do have, as we started, we do have a Balaam known to us in the region in Transjordan. Not only do we know this, but archaeologically, and we would date this to about the 8th century BCE, inscription. So it could be that this reflects a later story that is added in at a time when Israel's enemies directly across, there probably word has spread about this prophetic figure, Balaam.
That's right.
So
in fact, this inscription might have been a tourist site, Ross. It might have been something that people were well aware of. And so we come full circle to say that, yes, this is a meshing of a number of sources. Next week, Ross, we're going to find ourselves in Pinchas. This is where we're going to pick up from verse 10 of chapter 25. And once again, it is a championing of the Aaronite priesthood. Is where we find ourselves. Yay!
Good job.
Whee! Okay.
Oh, man.
That is
All
it.
right.
All right. Look forward to seeing you guys then. We'll be back this time again next week. Ezra, take us on out.
Well, that wraps up our dive into Parashat Balak, where we met a prophet who hears from God but can't see an angel, a king who tries to weaponize the supernatural, and a donkey who delivers the most cutting theological punchline in the Torah. We unpacked the Balaam narrative, explored his surprising cameo in the Deir Alla inscription, and followed the dark turn into the matter of Peor, that moment when Israel stumbled right after being divinely affirmed. It's a portion full of irony, warning, and complexity, and it leaves us with big questions about spiritual authority, foreign influence, and the fine line between blessing and curse. Next time, we're heading into Pinchas, where zealotry, priesthood, and divine covenants collide in ways that are as unsettling as they are revealing. You're not going to want to miss it. So thanks for listening to Torah Pearls, where we dust off the text, dig into the dirt, and keep the conversation honest. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your study partners, and we'll see you next week. Shalom, and take care.